As I was starting to say, colleagues, the economic plan that the government has presented to Parliament is rather like the curate's egg. It's got some good parts and some bad parts. Lord knows we need the good parts, or even the semi-good parts, namely the stimulus package. Canadians, like residents of too many countries, are facing terrible economic times, and they need economic stimulus. They need stimulus. This package is not perfect, as Senator Atkins has ably demonstrated for us, and I would particularly commend to your attention his remarks about the employment insurance system. Nonetheless, this stimulus package is the one that is on offer, and it's important. Canadians need it. That's the good or the pretty good part of the budget. But then, tucked into the budget implementation bill, we find all these other things, very few of which are good, many of which are not. Everything from national securities regulators to navigable waters to a long list of areas that should not be in a budget implementation bill, and of legislative proposals that should not actually see the light of day in this bill or in any other, in my view. However, I would argue that quite possibly the very worst of these is the iniquitous proposal on pay equity for the federal government's women employees. And if I think it's the worst of the lot, it's because this proposal undermines women's rights. That is to say, it undermines human rights. Because, colleagues, women's rights are human rights. That has been settled. It is not open for argument. It has been affirmed by the Supreme Court of Canada. It has been affirmed under international law, and it is no longer a subject for debate. That is why, until now, pay equity in the federal public service has come under the Canadian Human Rights Act. Now, I'm not arguing that the present system is perfect. Nobody could. It has grave flaws, and as has often been observed, it has tended to bog down many legitimate complaints in endless, decade-long, more than decade-long, procedural wranglings before the courts. For example, endless arguments over whether airline pilots and airline flight attendants work in the same establishment. Now, you would think that that ought not to be worth a 10-year court battle, but it was. So, I'm not suggesting that the present system is perfect. But what the government's proposal does is take a structure that was damaged, and instead of shoring it up, improving it, the government beats the whole pay equity system into rubble. There'll be precious little of it left. This bill, the portion of the budget implementation bill beginning on page 362, entitled, wrongly, Public Sector Equitable Compensation Act, removes pay equity from the Canadian Human Rights Act and gives jurisdiction over it to the Public Service Labour Relations Board, and makes pay equity a matter of collective bargaining. Collective bargaining is not an appropriate vehicle for pay equity disputes. I would cite, for example, from a letter written to Prime Minister Harper by a long list of eminent Canadians, 10 recipients of the Governor-General's Persons Awards, 42 law professors, and 25 other lawyers, professors, scholars, and eminent Canadians. And they said, the effect of this restructuring of the process for obtaining pay equity is to make pay equity no longer a human right of women, but a benefit or privilege which may be bargained successfully or not, makes pay equity subject to collective bargaining in the same way that, as somebody said, tea breaks are. This is not an appropriate way to handle matters of human rights. I would draw to your attention the fact that it is under existing collective agreements that pay equity discrepancies, gaps, have so often occurred. And this is because collective agreements are the product of the people who negotiate them, and they tend to reflect traditional gender biases and traditional stereotypes about what different jobs are worth. So it is a highly perilous enterprise to turn this subject over to the collective bargaining process. But in addition, this proposed legislation changes the criteria to be applied in assessing the value of work done by employees. And it now says that those criteria shall include the employer's recruitment and retention needs, taking into account the qualifications required to perform the work and the market forces operating in respect of employees with those qualifications. In other words, market forces that have already decided that a given class of work performed by women isn't worth as much as a different class of work performed by men, those market forces will now be included in the criteria to determine whether there is a pay equity case to be solved. This is, at very best, circular reasoning and a circular approach. I would quote the letter of the experts I referred to earlier again. This permits any evaluation to take into account that male-dominated jobs are valued more highly in the market, requiring the employer to pay more to attract new employees or retain current ones, even if the value of the work when it is assessed based on skill, effort and responsibility is no greater than that of female-dominated jobs. Of course, women will retain the right to complain. A woman who wants to complain can go and complain all by herself to the Public Service Labor Relations Board. But she will be all by herself. Her union will be prohibited by law from assisting her. Her union will be subject to a $50,000 fine if it assists her in preparing her complaint to the Public Service Labor Relations Board. Under the present system, imperfect as it may be, if you complain to the Canadian Human Rights Commission, it will then do the necessary investigation for you. So the woman who's making the complaint will not have to carry the immense administrative and financial burden of trying to ascertain the fine points of her employer's administrative policies. That won't be the case anymore either. She's going to be on her own. I could go on. I mean, there are so many elements in this bill that are scandalous. For example, because the proportion of employees who have to be of a given sex to qualify under the pay equity rules is bumped up to 70%. Thousands of women are now going to be excluded from the ability to seek pay equity restitution. That's just wrong. It is absolutely scandalous. It's a scandalous suppression of human rights, and it is not, despite the government's best efforts to portray it as such, it is not proactive within any meaning of that phrase. Proactive pay equity legislation does exist in this country. It exists, as the government reminds us, in Ontario and Manitoba and in Quebec. But what we're getting here is not that kind of proactive legislation. The Federal Task Force on Pay Equity recommended a few years ago that we follow the models of Ontario and Manitoba, which would include, among other things, the establishment of a new specialized pay equity commission and tribunal to handle pay equity questions. which would be a good thing in order to simplify the Human Rights Commission difficulties. But we're not getting that. We're getting a Public Service Labor Relations Board which has no expertise, which has no jurisprudence, as I was reminded today, and which has already too much to do, I'm sure. Nor are we getting what exists in Quebec, which is a very specific legal regime obliging employers to follow certain steps to adopt pay equity, to have pay equity committees, to have pay equity systems in place, and which has been extremely successful, and with which employers are very happy because they have found that it has, among other things, improved productivity in the workplace. But we're not getting any of that. Oh no. The government likes the word proactive, but it doesn't want to do anything that might be proactive. But now comes the real dilemma, colleagues. We go back to the fact that this iniquitous piece of legislation is contained within a broader bill that provides desperately needed economic stimulus for the citizens of this country. And it is women who, as a class, are the most vulnerable in the economic crisis in which we are now living. Women are the ones who are most likely to be working part-time, to be working in service industries, to be working in very low-paid jobs, marginal jobs. Women are the ones who are most likely to be let go as economic crisis bites. And so women are the ones who arguably more than anybody else, although goodness knows thousands of Canadians need this bill, but women stand to benefit most from it. I quote from the analysis provided by the economic consulting firm Informetrica, who said, and they have noted that the direct effect of this bill, which is to boost spending on construction and similar things, the direct effect is to increase the employment of men more than women, because more men are construction workers. But the indirect effect is different. Informetrica says, if one includes direct and induced effects and recognizes that there is a notably significant spending and tax effect on consumer service industries, where women predominate, there is both a proportionately and absolutely larger impact on female employment than on males, and furthermore, there will be a disproportionately large positive effect on those aged 54 and older for both sexes. But again, I would note that older women tend to be in even worse economic straits often than older men. So women need this package. What this bill has done, what this government has done, is pit two classes of women against each other. And it has pitted human rights against immediate, severe economic need. It is an appalling choice of policies. And why are they doing this? Well, I find it hard to believe that they're doing it in order to be proactive. I think it's more significant to look at the actual book of Canada's Economic Action Plan, where on page 211 they say that they're going to be giving us this new pay equity regime. And in what section of the plan is this announcement made? No, of course they're not listening. They don't want to listen, but
just think it's cooled down. They don't
the people will. The statement comes in the section of the economic plan that is headed Strong Expenditure Management. Saving money. They're doing it to save money. What an ignoble policy. What a scandalous, embarrassing policy for this government and this country to be saddled with. As I say, the women of Canada need the economic stimulus package. But Stephen Harper and his colleagues will carry this shame for a long, long time.